Hello, my friends. It is so good to have you here with me today. Pull up a chair, find a comfortable spot, and let's just take a breath together. Now, imagine for a moment you are standing in a huge stadium. Around you, thousands of people are cheering. The lights are bright, the grass is green, the players are running, and the crowd is loud, so loud that you can feel it in your chest. Football. The beautiful game. That is what people call it. The beautiful game. And yes, on the surface, it is beautiful. It is exciting. It is full of passion and joy and dreams. But today, my friend, we are not going to look at the surface. Today, we are going to go deeper. We are going to go into the shadows, into the dark corners that most people never see. Because behind the lights, behind the cheering crowds, behind the famous names and the big trophies, there is another story. A story of blood and crime and pain. A story that the cameras do not always show. So, take a breath, get comfortable, and let us begin this journey together. This is the dark history of football. Long before the big stadiums, long before the famous players and the television cameras, football was a very different game. It was wild, it was dangerous, and sometimes it was deadly. To understand the dark history of football, we must go back to the beginning. We must go back to the streets of medieval England, hundreds of years ago, to a time when football was not a sport. It was something closer to a battle. In those days, people played a game in the streets of their towns and villages. There were no rules. There were no referees. There were no lines on the ground. Two groups of people, sometimes hundreds of people on each side, would try to move a ball from one end of the town to the other, and they could do almost anything to stop the other side. They could kick, they could punch, they could push people into rivers or through windows. People got broken bones, people got knocked unconscious, and sometimes people died. This was football. This was how it began. Not as a beautiful game, but as a violent contest that towns used to settle old rivalries and release anger. The kings of England were so worried about this game that they tried to ban it. King Edward II banned it in 1314. King Edward III banned it again. King Richard II banned it. King Henry IV banned it. But no matter how many times the kings said stop, the people kept playing. Because even then, even in its most violent and chaotic form, football had something. Something that pulled people in. Something powerful and alive. And if this is how it began, you have to ask yourself one quiet question. Did football ever really change? Or did it just learn how to hide? By the middle of the 1800s, something began to change. England was growing. Cities were getting bigger. Schools and universities were becoming important. And in those schools, young men were playing football. But every school had different rules. Some allowed carrying the ball. Some did not. Some allowed hitting other players. Some did not. It was confusion. So in 1863, a group of men met in a pub in London, a pub called the Freemasons' Tavern, and they decided to write down the rules of football, official rules, rules that everyone would follow. And so the Football Association was born, and modern football, as we know it, officially began. This moment is often told as a proud story, a story of organization and progress. But if we look more carefully, we see something else. We see that even from the very first meeting, football was connected to power. The men in that pub were not poor men from the streets. They were educated men, men with money and influence. And they wrote the rules in a way that gave them control. They decided who could play. They decided how the game was organized. They decided who had power. And the ordinary people, the people who had played football in the streets for hundreds of years, they slowly lost their voice. The game became organized, but it also became a business. And when something becomes a business, other forces begin to move in the shadows. This was only the beginning, and already the darkness was there, quiet, patient, waiting. As football grew in England, something new appeared: football clubs. Groups of men who played together regularly, who wore the same colors, who represented their town or their neighborhood. And the people loved it. They came to watch every week, thousands of them, standing in the cold and the rain, cheering for their team. And very quickly, football clubs became more than just sports teams. They became symbols of identity, of pride, of belonging. If you supported a certain club, it said something about who you were, where you were from, what kind of person you were. And with that identity came something else: rivalry. Deep, passionate, sometimes violent rivalry. The matches between local clubs were not just games, they were battles. And the crowds that watched them were not always peaceful. In the early days of English football, crowd violence was common. Fans threw bottles. They invaded the pitch. They attacked players and referees. Police were sometimes powerless to stop it. And behind the scenes, the clubs themselves were involved in other problems. Some clubs paid players secretly, even when the rules said players could not be paid. This was called professionalism, and it was forbidden at first. But the clubs did it anyway, because winning was important, because money was important. And so, even in those early, simple years, the pattern was already forming. A pattern of rules being broken, of money moving in secret, of violence being close, always close to the surface of the game. Football was growing, and its shadow was growing with it. If there is one chapter in football's dark history that most people have heard about, it is this one: the era of the hooligans. This word, hooligan, means a violent and aggressive fan, and in England, from the 1960s to the late 1980s, football hooliganism became one of the most serious social problems in the country. Every weekend, across England, groups of young men would travel to football matches not to watch the game, but to fight. They organized themselves into gangs called firms. Each club had its own firm, and these firms had names: the Headhunters, the Intercity Firm, the Bushwhackers. These were not random groups of angry men. They were organized. They planned their fights in advance. They communicated with each other. They had leaders and strategies. And the violence they created was serious. People were beaten badly. People were stabbed. Trains were destroyed. Shops were broken. Towns were left in chaos after matches. The government was alarmed. The police did not know how to stop it, and the rest of Europe began to watch England with worry. Because English clubs were playing in European competitions now, and the hooligans were traveling with them, they brought their violence to other countries. And then, in 1985, something happened that shocked the entire world. Something that changed football forever. It happened in Brussels, Belgium, at a stadium called Heysel. And what happened there was not just violence. It was a tragedy. A real, terrible tragedy. But we will come to that in a moment. First, it is important to understand one thing. These young men, these hooligans, they did not appear from nowhere. They came from broken communities, from poverty and unemployment, from a feeling that nobody listened to them. Football was the one place where they felt powerful. And that feeling, that desperate search for power and identity, drove them to do terrible things. There are moments in history that are too painful to forget. Moments that stay with us. Moments that teach us, even when the lesson is hard. For football, there are two such moments, and they happened just 4 years apart. The first was Heysel, May 29th, 1985, the European Cup Final. Liverpool versus Juventus, held at the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, Belgium. Before the match began, English fans attacked Italian fans in one of the stadium sections. People tried to escape. They pushed against a wall, and the wall collapsed. 39 people died that night. 39 people who came to watch a football match. They did not go home. English clubs were banned from European football for 5 years, and the shame of that night stayed with football for a long time. But then, 4 years later, came Hillsborough. April 15th, 1989, an FA Cup semi-final, Liverpool versus Nottingham Forest, at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, England. The police made a decision to open a large gate to let fans into an already full section of the stadium. Fans poured in. People were crushed against metal fences. They could not breathe. They could not move. 97 people died. And for many years, the truth was hidden. The police told lies. They said the fans caused the disaster. The newspapers printed those lies. And the families of the victims spent 30 years fighting to find the truth. 30 years. And finally, the truth came out. It was the police who made the mistakes. It was a failure of the authorities, not the fans. These two disasters did not just change football's safety rules. They changed how people thought about power and truth and justice. And they showed the world that behind the beautiful game, there was a system that sometimes valued pride more than human life. After Heysel and Hillsborough, football began to change. New stadiums were built. Safety rules became much stricter. And in 1992, in England, a new league was created, the Premier League. It brought television money, enormous money, more money than football had ever seen before. And with that money came something else: power. And with power, as we have seen before, came corruption. The word corruption means when people in positions of trust use their power to cheat or steal for themselves. And in football, corruption grew quietly for many years. At the top of world football sits an organization called FIFA, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association. FIFA controls football everywhere in the world. It organizes the World Cup. It decides the rules. It chooses which countries host the biggest tournaments. And for decades, some of the most powerful men inside FIFA were corrupt. They took money in secret. Bribes. This means someone paid them money to make decisions in their favor. Which country gets to host the World Cup? The country that pays the most money in secret. Not always the country that deserves it most. In 2015, the world finally saw the truth. American authorities arrested several FIFA officials. They charged them with taking hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes. It was a scandal that shocked the world. But people who had watched football carefully were not surprised, because the signs had been there for years. Decisions that did not make sense. Tournaments given to countries with no football tradition. Votes that seemed to change overnight. The corruption was real. It was deep, and it had been going on for a very long time. And while the men in suits were taking their secret money, the players on the field, the real game, the real passion, it continued. Unaware, or perhaps not so unaware after all. Imagine you are watching a football match. Your team is playing well. They score a goal. The crowd cheers. But somewhere, in a quiet office far away, a man looks at his phone and smiles. Not because he supports your team, but because he already knew the goal was coming. Because he paid someone to make sure it happened. This is match fixing, and it is one of the darkest secrets in football. Match fixing means that the result of a game is decided before it is played. Players, referees, or club officials are paid secretly to make sure a certain thing happens. Maybe a player agrees to miss a penalty on purpose. Maybe a goalkeeper agrees to make a mistake at a key moment. Maybe a referee agrees to give a red card at the wrong time. And the people who pay for this are usually connected to illegal gambling networks, criminal organizations that make enormous amounts of money by betting on results they already know. Match fixing has been found in almost every country where football is played. In Italy, there was a massive scandal called Calciopoli in 2006. Powerful club officials were caught on phone calls, secretly arranging which referees would work their matches. Juventus, one of the most famous clubs in the world, was stripped of 2 league titles and sent down to a lower division. In Asia, entire leagues were infected with match fixing for years. Players were threatened. Some were too afraid to speak. Others accepted the money because they were poor and desperate. And in some parts of the world, players who refused to cooperate were threatened with violence, or worse. The beautiful game corrupted from the inside, and the fans in the stands cheering and believing, never knowing that the story they were watching had already been written. There is another darkness in football's history, one that is not about money or crime. It is about something older and more painful. It is about racism. From the very early days of professional football, black players faced hatred. In England, in the 1970s and 1980s, black players who stepped onto the pitch were met with terrible sounds from the crowd. People threw things at them. People shouted words so cruel that even today they are painful to repeat. And this was not just in England. Across Europe, black and minority players faced the same hatred. In stadiums in Spain, in Italy, in Eastern Europe, racist abuse was common. Sometimes it came from small groups. Sometimes it came from thousands of people at the same time. And for many years, the football authorities did very little. They looked away. They said it was a problem they could not control. Players were told to ignore it, to keep playing, to stay professional. But how do you stay professional when thousands of people are treating you as less than human? Some players spoke out. Some refused to continue playing when they were abused. And slowly, very slowly, the conversation began to change. Campaigns were created. Laws became stricter. Clubs were punished. But even today, even now, racism in football has not disappeared. It reappears in stadiums, in online messages to players, in the quiet decisions that are made about who gets to manage a club, who gets opportunities, who is trusted with power. The wound is old, and it has not fully healed. And that is a truth that football must continue to face. Every summer, the football world watches the transfer market. Big clubs spend hundreds of millions of euros buying players. Names move from one team to another, and the numbers are so large that they seem unreal. But behind those glamorous headlines, there is another story. A story about young boys, children. Some of them as young as 9 or 10 years old, taken from their families in Africa, in South America, in Eastern Europe, promised a contract, a career, a new life. And many of them end up with nothing. This practice is called illegal player trafficking. It is when agents or scouts go to poor countries and tell parents that their son is talented, that he will become a professional footballer, that he will earn money and give the family a better life. The parents believe it. They want to believe it. And they give their child to a stranger. The child is brought to Europe. He trains, he tries, but most of these children are never given a real chance. When the clubs decide they are not good enough, the children are simply released. They are left in a foreign country. No money, no family, no legal papers. Lost. FIFA has tried to create rules to stop this. There are now strict regulations about moving children across borders for football. But the rules are difficult to enforce, and the practice continues. Because the demand for young talent is so high, and because in poor countries the dream of football is so powerful that families are willing to take enormous risks. The beautiful game promises so much, and for too many children, it delivers only heartbreak. Today, football is bigger than ever. The Premier League is watched in almost every country on Earth. The World Cup is the most watched event in human history. The money involved is almost impossible to imagine. Top players earn more in 1 week than most people earn in a lifetime. And yet, even now, even in this modern age of cameras and transparency, the shadows remain. In recent years, new concerns have appeared. State-owned clubs, meaning football clubs bought by governments of certain countries, have spent billions of euros, not to make profit, but to improve the image of their country, to use football as a way of making people think positively about them. This practice is called sportswashing, and it raises serious questions. Questions about human rights, about whether sport can be used to hide the behavior of governments that do not respect their citizens. There are also concerns about the environment, about the massive carbon footprint of a global sport with private jets and year-round travel, about gambling companies that sponsor clubs and target vulnerable people, about the mental health of players who live under enormous pressure and public attention from very young ages. Football has more money than ever, more eyes than ever, more power than ever. And with that power comes responsibility. A responsibility that is not always taken seriously. The shadows of the past have not disappeared. They have simply taken new shapes. And if we want the beautiful game to truly be beautiful, we must be willing to look at them honestly. And so, my friend, we have come to the end of our journey today. We traveled a long road together, We started in the muddy streets of medieval England, where football was wild and dangerous and free. We walked through the organized chaos of early clubs and the violence of the terraces. We stood in the grief of Heysel and Hillsborough. We looked into the quiet offices where corrupt men made their secret decisions. We listened to the stories of children who crossed oceans with a dream that was never real. And we looked at the modern game, with all its money and all its power and all its unresolved shadows. This is the real history of football. Not just the trophies and the beautiful goals, but the full story, the honest story. And why does this matter to you, my friend, as an English learner? Because learning a language is not just about grammar and vocabulary. It is about understanding the world more deeply. It is about listening to difficult stories and finding the courage to think about them. Every time you listen to a story like this one, your English grows a little stronger. Your understanding of the world grows a little wider, and you become a little more capable of seeing things as they really are. That is a powerful thing. So keep listening, keep learning, keep coming back, because every story we tell together is a step forward on your journey. If today's story moved you, if it made you think, please leave a comment. Tell us what surprised you. Tell us what you felt. And if you want to continue this journey, this wonderful adventure of learning English through story, then subscribe to Storyline English, because there are many more stories waiting for you. Stories of courage and darkness and discovery. Stories that will teach you and stay with you long after the listening is over. Thank you for being here today, my friend. It is always, always good to have you.